sorry now that I'm a little late. I apologize that you had to wait. It totally slipped my mind. I lost all my sense of time. So buy me that drink and just let me think, and I'll tell you the reasons why. My alibi.
Hello and welcome to Alibi the podcast, an initiative started by Gagasan Mahasiswa Undang-Undang Sabah, or GANS for short. I am your host today, Constance Lee. Today's episode of Alibi the podcast features a topic more than fitting for the month of September, a month that holds much significance for us Malaysians. Entitled 60 Years Since the Malaysia Agreement 1963, the story of Sabah's fight for rights. Today's episode of Alibi the podcast aims to further showcase the significance of MA63 as well as assess the status of MA63 in present-day Malaysia. We will also take a look into how this has affected Sabahans and Sarawakans as a whole, as well as explore methods through which MA63 can be fully realized. Joining us today for this conversation is our honorable guest, Datuk Roger Chin. Datuk Roger is currently a senior lawyer at Messrs. Chin Law Wong and Fu, and he boasts an impressive reputation in Sabah's legal landscape. Datuk Roger Chin completed his legal education in the University of Melbourne, and he is currently a council member at Sabah's very own Borneo International Center for Arbitration and Mediation, also known as BICAM. Datuk Roger is also an ardent MA63 advocate, and he plays a massive role in educating and promoting activism among Sabahans in regards to the issue of Sabah's 40% revenue. Thank you very much for joining us today, Datuk Roger.
Thank you for having me.
To ease us into our conversation today, let's start with this question. What is the Malaysia Agreement 1963 and what makes it distinct from any other agreements that we currently have in Malaysia? The floor is yours, Datuk Roger.
Thank you. So, the Malaysia Agreement 1963 is basically the foundational legal document that facilitated the formation of Malaysia, integrating Malaysia, Singapore, Sabah, Sarawak into one single entity, and its distinctiveness basically arises from specific safeguards, guarantees that it provides to Sabah and Sarawak, including control over immigration, religion, and local governance, all of which are reflected in the 20 points agreement. Additionally, MA63 is unique due to its international treaty status, signed by multiple sovereign entities and ratified internationally, thus giving it a standing above regular domestic laws. This agreement ensures that Sabah and Sarawak retain significant autonomy, particularly concerning financial, educational, and resource management matters, distinguishing it from other domestic agreements in Malaysia.
I see. So, as we know and as you've mentioned, MA63 is an international treaty. I believe that it's registered in the United Nations bearing the number 10760. So,
That's
how
correct,
has, yep, thank you. So, how has MA63 been integrated into Malaysian legislation as an international treaty?
So MA63 has been incorporated into the Malaysian Federal Constitution, serving as the legal foundation for the existence of Malaysia as a federation. Unlike typical international treaties, which Malaysia does not automatically domesticate, MA63 was an exception due to its constitutional nature. Provisions of the agreement are embedded within the Federal Constitution, granting Sabah and Sarawak distinct rights such as immigration, control, financial autonomy, and representation in Parliament. However, as you would know, some areas of MA63, such as full fiscal autonomy and Borneanization, remain under-implemented, leaving gaps in the agreement's fulfillment.
So you did touch on the aspect of Borneanization. That's a very interesting topic. Can you please elaborate on that?
So what was meant to happen is all the top civil posts were meant to be filled up with Sabahans rather than non-Sabahans. And I think although significant steps have been taken, to try to honor that arrangement. Reality is it has not been fully implemented, and not all top civil posts federal civil posts, I should say, are being held by Sabahans, notwithstanding it was agreed upon in the 20 points agreement.
I see. And I believe that we see this disparity in the Dewan Rakyat as well, where I believe that there's an issue with the number of representatives that Sabah and Sarawak possess. Is that correct?
Yes, so basically what happened was when Singapore left Malaysia, their seats should have been distributed to Sabah and Sarawak, because the whole idea was that you would balance out representation in Parliament. It was never meant to be that Malaya or Peninsular Malaysia would get disproportionately more seats than what the other people, Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore would have gotten. So at the formation of Malaysia, that proportion, it is argued, should have been maintained, meaning Peninsular Malaysia's proportion should not have increased. However, what happened was when Singapore left Malaysia, their seats basically got absorbed by Peninsular Malaysia, and their proportion grew larger than what it was meant to be. The proportion should have stayed significantly similar, meaning whatever Peninsular Malaysia had at that point in time should have remained, and the extra seats left by Singapore's leaving Malaysia should have been equally shared between Sabah and Sarawak, so that that proportion maintained. So that is where the 1/3 comes in. Sabah and Sarawak, together with Singapore, had 1/3 of the share of parliament, and after after Singapore left Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak should still have maintained 1/3 of parliament. However, that's not the case. And like I said, Singapore's seats basically got absorbed into West Malaysia, and now they are more than 2/3.
I see. Thank you for your enlightening explanation, Datuk Roger. So we might have hopped into the explanation of this question a little bit early, but MA63 was signed 61 years ago in 1963. So our question being, how do you see it being honored and put into practice in modern day Malaysia? And what other gaps do you see in its fulfillment as of present?
So while some aspects of MA63 has been respected, many core promises remain unfulfilled. For example, the promised autonomy over education, revenue retention, and public service unionization, like we just mentioned, has yet to be fully restored. The 40% revenue entitlement for Sabah has been particularly contentious, with recent negotiations making progress, but still falling short of full implementation. Although recent initiatives such as the formation of committees to address MA63 compliance show federal government recognition, the pace of progress has been slow, leaving many Sabahans and Sarawakians feeling marginalized. As far as gaps, the incomplete fulfillment of MA63 has basically impacted the socio-economic development of Sabah and Sarawak. Key areas like infrastructure, healthcare, and education have lagged behind, creating disparities between East Malaysia and Peninsular Malaysia. Anyone who has traveled between the both and seen both cannot deny there is a huge disparity between the infrastructure that is available in West Malaysia versus the infrastructure in East Malaysia. Furthermore, the lack of full control over natural resources, oil and gas, mining, and inadequate federal funding have stifled economic growth in both states. This situation has fostered a sense of frustration and disillusionment, particularly regarding the federal government's commitment to upholding the agreement's original terms.
I see. So as we can see, these gaps in MA63's fulfillment have really affected the livelihood of Sabahans and Sarawakians. It's really interesting that you brought up how this has stifled the economic progress of both states, considering Sabah especially has historically played such a significant role in national development, especially in regards to crude oil production, timber, tourism, and rubber. So, from your perspective, what makes MA63 so important, and why is it so important that these 20 safeguards or 18 safeguards for Sarawak are being fulfilled? Why is that so important for you?
Well, it's important because when Sabah and Sarawak joined Malaysia, they were obviously very different parties in terms of wealth, in terms of what they actually had at that particular point in time. So Sabah Sarawak is obviously separated by a very vast sea from Peninsular Malaysia. And in another day, another age, we would have been a different country, okay, or a different region at the very least. Obviously, uh, um, uh, we are not part of the Malayan um, uh, uh, country, if you want to call it that. So it was a formation of another country with different parties. So there was obviously a clear, distinct difference between East Malaysia and Peninsular Malaysia. So when they formed the country, Sabah and Sarawak basically demanded certain safeguards in order to make sure that Sabah and Sarawak can maintain its individualness, its distinctiveness, but at the same time grow with the new country that they were going into. So basically, the promise was always that by joining Malaysia, obviously Sabah and Sarawak would contribute to Malaysia, the growth of Malaysia as a country, as a nation, but in return, certain things obviously were meant to be given back to Sabah and Sarawak, which unfortunately, like I said, the disparity that I talk about is just one instance. For example, the infrastructure development. No one can doubt, like I said, when you land in Kuala Lumpur, you land in KLIA2 versus our KKIA, the vast disparity between the two airports. And on the way to KL from KLIA 1 or 2, the number of buses, trains, high-speed rail, and so on and so forth that are available versus there are no public buses in Sabah. So this is just an example. These are just examples of how far the disparity, how wide the disparity is, and why when we joined Malaysia, that was never meant to happen. Whatever Sabah and Sarawak contributed to Malaysia, we were obviously meant to get something back so that we could develop Sabah to be on par with West Malaysia. In fact, that was the promise made at that time. When you come and join Malaysia, you will grow as a country, state, or whatever you want to call it, region, and you can enjoy the same richness as West Malaysia, Peninsular Malaysia. But as we can see, unfortunately, that is not the case.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roger. I'm very much with you on that, especially on the point on public transport. Because as someone who doesn't know how to drive, getting around KK is notoriously difficult. But drawing on that, even if we look towards our neighbors down south in Sarawak, I believe anyone who's been to Sarawak can agree that they enjoy, well, relatively improved infrastructure as well as the public transport point, as we've just mentioned. Sarawak has recently just implemented their very own ART, and there's a lot more awareness about this issue, and there's a lot more leadership regarding this issue. So, what do you think us Sabahans can take from our neighbors down south in this regard? How can we improve based on the example that they set?
I think what is you raised it yourself. Basically, there's a lot more awareness, perhaps, and I think that is something very crucial. Sabah may have joined the party late, but nevertheless, we are in the party, and awareness is absolutely crucial for this to happen. One of the main reasons why things are not what they should be is due to a lack of awareness in Sabah. Many Sabahans, unfortunately, do not understand what all of this MA63 issue is. It's easy to hear it and to maybe even get upset about certain things. However, there's a lot of disinformation out there, or even worse, there's a lot of lack of knowledge about it. Just because you can utter the word MA63 does not mean you know what it actually means and what it stands for. So it's crucial that everyone from top, the smartest people to everybody, from the people in the cities to people in the kampongs, from doctors to makciks, to everybody are able to understand this. And that's why it's crucial. For example, whatever Guns is doing is to reach out to the public and demystify this creature called MA63. At the end of the day, it's not, it's not terribly complex. It's actually quite simple, right? But the question is, why has it been? And I, for one, am guilty of that as well. When I first started listening to MA63, I thought, God, this is such a complex thing. I don't even know what it means, right? And if I can say that, if I said that, then I imagine how many other people would have said, "Oh, sorry, I don't understand. I only know the four alphabets and characters, MA and 63, but I really don't know what it means." So I've taken the challenge to try to demystify it, simplify it, so that everyone can understand it. And likewise, I hope Guns and everybody else can advocate, simplify, and make sure that people understand it. So with this awareness, you can never ever go back on MA63, and it must be something that needs to be realized. Whatever were promised needs to be fulfilled.
Thank you very much, Datuk Roger. I, for one, can contribute to that because I believe that I used to use MA63, like kind of throw it around like some kind of very casual thing when actually it's something that's very crucial to our nation's development and even its birth. So, drawing back to our conversation, from your perspective, what needs to be done in order to fully bring the core objectives of MA63 to fruition?
So there are certain critical steps that must be taken. One is restoration of autonomy. Sabah and Sarawak needs to regain full control over key areas like education, health, and natural resources as originally promised. The second area is equitable economic development, like what we mentioned. The federal government must honor the 40% revenue entitlement to Sabah, alongside ensuring proper development funding and infrastructure improvements. And lastly, there must be some mechanism, some institutionalization of or safeguards, which, for example, a formal legal framework should be established to protect the autonomy and special rights of these states, including maybe creating a tribunal or body specifically dedicated to enforcing MA63 provisions.
I see. So, since MA63 largely reflects the interests of Sabahans and Sarawakians, our West Malaysian peers might not feel the same drive to learn and educate others about MA63 that we do. In fact, we tend to hear a lot of very conflicting statements, and such as, Sabah and Sarawak joined Malaysia, and things like that. I've even had West Malaysian peers ask me if we use the same currency. So, they might not feel the same drive to actually learn about this that us Sabahans and Sarawakians may have. So, how can we effectively engage the attention of our West Malaysian peers?
Obviously, education and awareness campaigns are important, like what I said earlier on. Advocacy in a simple manner for everyone to understand one. And education is crucial as well because we need to integrate MA63 into the national education curriculum. When I studied history in high school, all we learned was about 31st of August. Okay, 16th of September was never mentioned, don't even know what it is. And you would learn more about the history of Malaya, Majapahit, and all those kingdoms, Srivijaya, but nothing ever talked about the formation of Malaysia. and how Malaysia was formed. So there is one crucial chunk of Malaysian history which was not taught. So in a way, I don't blame the West Malaysians for not understanding or not even caring for that matter, because it was never brought to their attention. So what obviously is crucial is it needs to be put into our national education curriculum so that people are aware how Malaysia was formed. Because unfortunately, until just lately, it's just been a very West Malaysian centric history that everyone has learned. And and another thing that needs to be done, I think, is to highlight national benefits. Emphasize that fully honoring MA63 enhances national cohesion and equitable development, benefiting all Malaysians. I think that needs to be emphasized. It cannot be us versus them, okay? It must be that if we implement MA63, there will be a very happy nation and we can prosper that way because all the regions are developed. And because they're developed, they can bring more revenue to Malaysia. Imagine there are a lot of foreign direct investments which are interested to come into Sabah. But what is lacking? Water, electricity, roads. These are the main complaints. So because they can't come into Sabah, they may go to another country, Indonesia, Vietnam, for example, right? However, if MA63 was implemented fully, including the 40% revenue, and infrastructure was developed to what it should be. Imagine if Sabah's infrastructure was on par with West Malaysia. Imagine having proper highways between KK to Sandakan to Tawau, as an example. Then what would happen is more foreign direct investments, or even local direct investments, would come into Sabah. And by virtue of all of these things coming into Sabah, obviously more revenue will be generated. And together, uh, Malaysia will rise. So I think it's very important to change the narrative of MA63 is about East Malaysia only. No, it's also for the benefit of Malaysia. And I think if we can somehow change the national benefits advocacy that is out there, I think it would maybe get the Peninsular Malaysians to understand it and accept it for what it can do for Malaysia. And lastly, we also need to have collaborative advocacy, encouraging joint initiatives between East and West Malaysia to showcase the integral role of Sabah and Sarawak to the country's overall progress. So I think that's very important as well, because it's always been when you hear about the nation's progress, Sabah and Sarawak is unfortunately rarely mentioned in this. What needs to be done is a changing of the narrative to say that Sabah and Sarawak contributed or contributes and continues to contribute vastly to Malaysia's riches. And I think with all of these things, it will become accepted, it will become mainstream, it won't be an East Malaysian thing. All of these crazy mad East Malaysians talking about MA63 don't understand why they're doing that. Um, and then it'll be mainstream and everyone will accept it and they will know and realize how much it benefits Malaysia.
Thank you very much, Datuk Roger. That's very true. In many ways, it's actually a collaborative effort that whose results we can all enjoy collectively. So before we end our podcast today, are there any last words that you would like to leave with our listeners today?
I would love for the young of Malaysia and especially Sabah to know about MA63 and what it is. I think what one thing that has been missing is the lack of awareness, like I said, a lack of advocacy amongst the young people. And I wonder how many of the young actually understand it and actually know how to share that information. What needs to be done is you must be able to tell your neighbors, what it is, what it stands for, simply, so that your neighbors and everybody can understand. And similarly, when, for example, your Sarawakian or your Peninsular Malaysian friends ask you, actually, what is it all about? You can also explain to them simply, not get tongue-tied and not sure what you're talking about. So if that happens and the young are fully aware, then Sabah is in safe hands and Sabah will definitely flourish. And that is all my hope and wishes for Sabah.
Thank you very much, Datuk Roger. Again, special thanks to you for joining us on our podcast today. We certainly learned something today, and we hope you did too. With that, we've reached the end of our podcast episode today. Thank you for listening to Alibi the podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you want to find more podcasts like these, subscribe to our channels on YouTube, Spotify, and Anchor to stay updated on all our latest releases. We hope you can join us for our next episode as well. Thanks again and take care.
Sorry now that I'm a little late. I apologize that you had to wait. It totally slipped my mind. I lost all my sense of time. So buy me that drink and just let me think, and I'll tell you the reasons why.